Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Human mechanic saves tiny alien beast. But its dwarfism was actually something sinister. The scrapyards of Ronnie stretched endlessly beneath the sky, a sea of twisted metal and forgotten machines. Nash moved carefully through the wreckage, his boots crunching against the debris, as he scanned the ruins of an alien freighter. He had been here before, salvaging parts, bartering old circuits for credits, but today something felt different. The ship's carcass loomed ahead, half buried in the sand. It had been here for years, abandoned, forgotten, left to rot. Nash wasn't expecting much, maybe a few intact power cores if he was lucky, but as he stepped over a crumpled panel, a faint sound stopped him in his tracks, a whimper, faint and trembling. Nash frowned, his grip tightening on the rusted metal bar he carried for protection. He turned slowly, his ears straining. Another sound followed, this one softer, almost lost beneath the desert wind. Something was alive in there. He moved forward, pushing aside scraps of broken hull plating, and then, beneath a tangle of discarded wires and shattered glass, he saw it, a tiny, quivering creature. Nash sucked in a sharp breath. It looked like a tiger, but not any tiger he had ever seen. Its fur shimmered faintly, a mix of silver and deep violet, as if it had been dusted with stardust. Its eyes were enormous, glowing softly in the dim light, and its small, rounded ears twitched at his presence. But the most striking thing was that it was too small, barely the size of a house cat. Its limbs were short, its body compact in a way that felt unnatural. This wasn't just a cub, it was something else. The creature shivered, its oversized eyes locked on him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Nash knew that look. Abandonment. Slowly, carefully, he knelt down. "Hey there," he murmured in a low voice, and even the tiny tiger let out another soft whimper, curling in on itself as if trying to disappear into the metal wreckage. Nash's gut twisted. Someone had left it here. Maybe as an experiment gone wrong, maybe because it wasn't big enough, strong enough, whatever the reason, it had been left to die. His hands curled into fists, he couldn't just walk away. Reaching into his pack, Nash pulled out a small piece of dried meat from his rations, and he extended it carefully. "Come on, little guy," he coaxed. The tiger hesitated, its nose twitching at the scent of food, then, ever so slowly, it stretched its tiny neck forward and took a tentative bite. Nash let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "All right," he said softly, "guess that means you're coming with me." The Celestial Nomad was a ship that had seen better days, rusted in places, patched together with salvage parts from a dozen different systems. It was a mechanic's dream and nightmare, but for Nash it was home. The moment he stepped into the ship's dimly lit cargo hold, the tiny tiger clung to his jacket, its small claws hooked into the fabric. It had stopped shaking, but Nash could feel the tension in its tiny body, its heart pounding against his chest. Gently, he pried its claws loose and set it down on a pile of soft, unused blankets near his workstation. The cub didn't run, it just sat there, watching him, studying him. Nash ran a hand through his hair, exhaling, "What the hell am I supposed to do with you?" The tiger chirped, not a growl, not a snarl, just a tiny, high-pitched sound somewhere between a purr and a question. Nash blinked. "Did you just talk back to me?" The cub chirped again. For the first time in what felt like forever, Nash laughed. "All right, fine," he muttered, kneeling down. "You need a name." The little creature flicked its short tail, staring at him intently, waiting. Nash thought for a moment, its fur shimmered, its eyes held the depth of the cosmos. "Orion," he finally said. "Yeah, you look like an Orion." The cub blinked slowly, then, to Nash's absolute shock, it let out the tiniest roar he had ever heard, a bray, squeaky attempt at something fierce. Nash stared, then despite himself, he grinned. "Yeah, kid, that'll do." The Celestial Nomad drifted through the darkness of space, its old engines humming beneath the weight of its patched-together frame. Nash had been flying solo for years, navigating the outer systems, fixing broken ships, and trading spare parts for just enough credits to keep moving. His ship wasn't the best, but it was his, a small piece of freedom in a galaxy that chewed people up and spat them out. And now, somehow, he had a passenger. Orion lay curled up on a thick bundle of spare blankets near Nash's workstation, his tiny form barely noticeable against the clutter of tools and wires. He had eaten half of the dried meat Nash had given him, and now rested, his small round ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. His fur shimmered faintly in the dim cabin lights, catching flickers of violet and silver with every slow rise and fall of his breath. Nash leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching him. He had no idea what to do next. It wasn't like he had planned on taking in an abandoned alien tiger with dwarfism. He had found plenty of broken things in his life, machines, engines, ships, but not creatures, not living beings that looked at him with eyes full of questions. Orion shifted, stretching one short paw toward his face before letting out a soft huff. His tail, stubby and shorter than it should have been, flicked lazily. Nash exhaled, "You're making yourself at home already, huh?" The little tiger cracked open one of his glowing eyes, studying Nash for a long moment before closing it again. A small noise rumbled from his tiny chest, not quite a purr, not quite a growl, something in between. Nash's chest tightened. He wasn't supposed to get attached, this wasn't his problem, but somehow it already was. Grumbling to himself, he pushed up from his chair and made his way toward the cockpit, leaving Orion to rest. He needed to figure out what the hell he had just gotten himself into. The next morning, or what passed for morning in the eternal black of space, Nash awoke to a strange sensation. Something was climbing on him. His eyes shot open just in time to see Orion perched on his chest, staring directly into his face. The tiny tiger let out a sharp, questioning chirp. Nash blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. What? Another chirp, then without warning, Orion headbutted his chin. All right, I'm up. What's your problem? The little tiger jumped off his chest and bounded toward the table where Nash kept his tools and ration packs. He sat down, his small tail flicking expectantly. Realization dawned. You're hungry, Orion chirped again, louder this time. Nash sighed, throwing his legs over the side of the cot. You're pushy for something that weighs less than my toolbox. He pulled out another piece of dried meat from the stash and tossed it toward Orion. The cub pounced on it immediately, gnawing with tiny but shockingly sharp teeth. Nash shook his head, watching him. You don't act like you've been abandoned long, he muttered. Most animals left alone that long don't trust. This fast, Orion paused mid-bite, staring at him again. Nash exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. He knew that stare, he had seen it in people, in old war veterans, in himself when he caught glimpses of his reflection. Orion hadn't just been abandoned, he had been discarded. Yeah, Nash muttered, stretching his sore shoulders. I get it, kid. Orion let out a small, satisfied huff and returned to devouring his food. Nash leaned back against the bulkhead, staring at the ceiling. He was in deep trouble because this wasn't just a stray he could drop off at the next space station. Orion needed him, and whether he liked it or not, he wasn't walking away from this. Nash had always trusted his instincts, a mechanic's gut feeling could mean the difference between a routine engine tune-up and an explosion waiting to happen, but right now his instincts were screaming at him that something was off. It started when he decided to check Orion's collar. The little tiger had been wearing a simple, tattered band around his neck, barely noticeable beneath his thick, silken fur. It wasn't just for decoration, the material wasn't something Nash had seen before, some kind of reinforced fiber, laced with faint circuitry. Sitting at his workbench, he carefully pried apart the layers, hoping to find some kind of identification, a tracker maybe, a data tag instead. He found coordinates. The readout blinked up at him from his scanner, a location in neutral space, far from any trade routes or inhabited planets, a dead zone. Nash frowned. Someone had left a location on Orion, a place they either wanted to find again or never wanted to return to. His stomach twisted. If Orion had been abandoned, why mark him with this, unless they had expected him to die there? A tiny, warm weight pressed against his arm. Orion had climbed onto the workbench, his wide, glowing silver eyes staring up at him. He let out a small, soft chirp, his ears twitching as if sensing Nash's unease. The mechanic exhaled through his nose, setting the collar down. "Yeah, kid," he muttered. "Looks like you came from somewhere important." Orion didn't respond, he just tilted his head, waiting. Nash had seen animals before, but there was something unsettlingly human about the way this little creature watched him, as if he were trying to understand, for a moment. Nash thought about ignoring it, throwing the coordinates away, flying to the next station, and pretending none of this mattered. But that wasn't who he was. Instead, he punched the location into his NAV system. The celestial nomad's thrusters hummed beneath his feet as the course was set. "Guests are taking a little trip," Nash muttered, glancing down at Orion. The tiny tiger wagged his stubby tail. 3 hours into the jump, the first warning alert chimed through the cockpit. Nash had been in the cargo hold, working on a stabilizer coil, when the sound cut through the air, an incoming ship. He swore under his breath, tossing his wrench aside as he moved fast toward the control panel. His gut tightened when he saw the readout. The ship was sleek, black, and silent, with no transponder, no registry. It had been lurking just within his sensor range until now. They weren't just passing through, they had been waiting. Orion padded into the cockpit beside him, sensing the change in atmosphere. The little tiger let out a low, questioning sound. Nash's jaw tightened. "Not good, kid." A second later, a tight beam transmission crackled through his comms. "You have something that belongs to us. Hand it over." Nash went still, the voice on the other end was too smooth, too calm. It wasn't about a bounty hunter or some random scavenger, this was someone who already knew what he had on board. His fingers hovered over the controls. "Sorry," he replied evenly, "not sure what you're talking about." A pause followed, then a quiet chuckle. "We know about the tiger." Nash's pulse spiked. He didn't like how that sounded, he hadn't realized abandoned animals came with an ownership claim. "You don't understand," the voice continued, unbothered by his defiance, "it's not a pet, it's an experiment, a failed one." Nash's blood ran cold as his gaze flicked to Orion. The little cub sat perfectly still, his silver eyes unreadable, watching Nash instead of the screen. Not just abandoned, discarded, a failed experiment, Nash's hands curled into fists. He had seen too many things thrown away when they were no longer useful, broken parts, broken people. He wasn't about to let them take Orion back. A new alert flashed across the console. The enemy ship was arming its weapons. "Last chance, mechanic," the voice warned, "hand it over and we'll let you go." Nash gritted his teeth and reached for the thruster controls, slamming them forward. The celestial nomad lurched, the engines roaring as he took them into a sharp evasive maneuver. The enemy ship fired a blast, raising the hull and sending a violent shudder through the entire vessel. Orion let out a startled yelp, his claws digging into the co-pilot's seat. Nash swore, his hands flying over the controls. "Hang on, kid," he muttered as he pulled them into a steep dive, veering toward the asteroid field ahead. It was their only chance. If they could lose them in the debris, they might have time to jump to light speed. Orion pressed himself against Nash's arm, trembling. Don't worry," Nash murmured, gripping the controls tighter. "I'm not letting them take you." The ship twisted through the maze of floating rock, and metal plasma bolts tore past them. Another shot hit the stabilizer, warnings blared, they weren't going to make it. And then Orion moved. The little tiger pressed his paws against the control panel, his glowing silver eyes narrowing, and suddenly the enemy ship's weapons shorted out. The ship veered wildly, alarms flashing across its hull, as its targeting systems fried instantly. Nash barely had time to process what had happened, but he didn't waste it. He yanked the hyperdrive switch, and the celestial nomad jumped to light speed, leaving the enemy ship far behind. For a long moment there was only silence. Nash's hands were still clenched over the controls, his breathing heavy, the emergency lights flickered overhead, and the engine hummed with the steady pulse of their escape. Slowly, he turned to Orion. The little tiger stared back at him, his silver eyes gleaming not just with intelligence, but with something more. "Okay, kid," Nash muttered. "What the hell are you?" Orion just flicked his stubby tail, and for the first time, Nash realized this was bigger than he had ever imagined. The celestial nomad drifted silently through deep space, the hum of the engine a steady reminder that they were still moving, still breathing, still alive. Nash leaned against the control panel, staring at the star chart on the display. The coordinates embedded in Orion's collar were only a few jumps away. Now he should have turned back, he should have dumped the collar, taken a different route, let this whole thing die in the void where it belonged. But he couldn't, not after what had happened back there, not after Orion had somehow shut down an entire ship's weapon systems just by touching the control panel. The tiny alien tiger sat curled on the co-pilot seat, his shimmering silver eyes flicking between Nash and the view outside. He looked calm, as if he hadn't just thrown a fully armed, military-class ship into chaos with nothing but instinct, or perhaps, something else entirely. Nash ran a hand through his hair. "You don't even know what you did, do you?" Orion blinked, then, as if answering, he flicked his tail and chirped a high, soft sound somewhere between curiosity and defiance. Nash let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, that's what I thought." The closer they got to the coordinates, the worse the feeling in his gut became. It wasn't just some abandoned outpost or forgotten colony, something had happened there, and Orion was the key to it. A warning light flickered on the dashboard, they were approaching their destination. Nash tightened his grip on the controls as the ship emerged from hyperspace, the swirling light fading into the eerie stillness of real space. His eyes narrowed as the station came into view. It was huge, a sprawling GCT research facility, half its structure broken apart, drifting in the shadow of a dying star. The surrounding debris field suggested something had gone very wrong here. Orion let out a low, rumbling sound, not fear, but recognition. Nash's jaw clenched. "This is it, isn't it?" The little tiger didn't answer, he didn't have to. Taking a deep breath, Nash guided the ship toward the station. The air inside the station was thick with dust and silence, the kind of silence that meant no one had walked these halls in a long, long time. Nash stepped carefully through the dim corridors, his boots echoing against the metal floor. His blaster was strapped to his thigh, but he had a sinking feeling that it wouldn't do much against whatever had been left behind here. Orion padded beside him, his tiny body moving with a strange familiarity. He knew this place, which meant he had been here before. The walls were lined with shattered stasis pods, their glass fractured, their contents long since decayed or removed. Some still had flickering data screens, but the language was something alien, something Nash had never seen before. A chill crawled down his spine, this wasn't a colony, it was a testing facility. Orion let out a low shudder, his ears flattening. Nash crouched beside one of the broken pods, brushing dust off the screen. It flickered weakly, the text barely readable, Project STX-7, subject viability failed. His pulse spiked. This wasn't just a lab, this was where they had made Orion, the collar, the military-grade ship that had hunted them, the way Orion could manipulate energy fields without even realizing it. He wasn't an accident, he was an experiment. A soft mechanical beep suddenly filled the room. Nash tensed, spinning toward the sound. One of the last intact pods had activated, and a recording began to play. The voice was hollow and distorted, but clear enough to send ice through Nash's veins, Subject STX, first of its kind. Unstable, highly reactive to technological systems. Experiment deemed too unpredictable for continued study. Disposal initiated. Nash's breath hitched. Disposal, they had meant to erase Orion, and yet somehow the little tiger had survived. Orion stepped forward, pressing a paw against the broken glass of the pod. His fur bristled, and for the first time since Nash had met him, he looked angry. Nash felt the anger too. They had tried to create something, then had thrown it away when it didn't fit their expectations. A new noise echoed down the corridor, a ship docking. Nash's stomach dropped. They weren't alone anymore. The air inside the station shifted, and a soft vibration trembled through the metal walls, the unmistakable sound of a ship docking nearby. Nash's pulse spiked. Someone had followed them, someone who had been waiting for them to lead them here. Orion's fur bristled, his silver eyes flicking toward the entrance as if he could feel the presence coming for them. His tiny body went tense, ears flattened, tail lashing behind him. Nash reached for his blaster, cursing under his breath. He hadn't expected backup to arrive this fast. They must have been tracking his ship the entire time, waiting for him to do the hard work of finding this place. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow, deliberate, confident. A voice crackled through the station's old intercom system, smooth and cold. "You should have left it where it was, mechanic." Nash's stomach twisted. The voice belonged to the same man from before, the one who had ordered Orion's retrieval. Whoever they weren't just bounty hunters or mercenaries, they were the ones who made Orion, and now they had come to finish what they started. Orion let out a low warning growl, tiny but filled with an unmistakable fury. Nash clenched his teeth. "We need to move," he said, grabbing Orion and sprinting toward the back of the lab, weaving through the shattered remains of failed experiments, broken stasis pods, and ruined terminals. The station was old, but it was massive. If they could reach the far docking bay, they might still have time to get back to the ship. Behind them, the doors hissed open and enemy soldiers poured in, 4, maybe 5, all armored, weapons drawn, their visors gleaming under the dim emergency lights, scanning the room. "Fan out," the leader ordered. "Don't kill the creature, the mechanic is expendable." Nash barely had time to react before a plasma bolt seared past his shoulder, hitting the wall beside him. He cursed, ducking low behind a fallen console, while Orion huddled beside him, his small body tense and shaking, not from fear, but from something else. His silver eyes glowed, and suddenly the lights inside the station flickered. Nash's breath caught as he felt the entire structure pulse like a ripple through reality itself. Orion wasn't just hiding, he was doing something. The enemy soldiers faltered, their equipment short-circuited in real time. Sparks snapped and crackled from their visors, weapons misfiring, sensors blinking out one by one. Then Orion moved. He launched forward with impossible speed, slipping beneath their attacks, his tiny body a blur as he darted between them. One of the soldiers tried to grab him, but the moment his hand touched Orion's fur, his armor fried. The man screamed as his gauntlet overloaded, circuits bursting, before he collapsed in a heap. Nash didn't waste time. He fired a clean shot into the chest of another soldier, sending him stumbling back. Orion darted toward the others, weaving between their feet, their systems failing the moment they tried to react. The squad had no chance. Within seconds, all of them were either unconscious or too damaged to fight. Orion stood in the center of the chaos, breathing hard, his fur standing on end. Nash exhaled, gripping his blaster tight. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, kid," he said. The little tiger huffed, but before they could celebrate, a final, slow clap echoed through the station. The leader, he was still standing, his armor flickering but still functional, unlike the others who hadn't gone down, looked directly at Orion. "You were never meant to survive," he said, his voice laced with disappointment. "You were a mistake." Orion snarled, and Nash saw red. Before Nash could pull the trigger, the enemy leader moved. He was fast, too fast for a man in heavy armor. In the blink of an eye, he was on them, his hand grabbing Orion by the scruff. The little tiger yowled and thrashed, but the soldier held firm. Nash lunged, but a shock wave from the man's suit blasted him backward. He hit the ground hard, pain exploding through his ribs. The leader turned, gripping Orion tighter. You don't understand what you're holding, he said, almost calmly. You think this is a pet. It's a weapon, one we should have destroyed long ago. Orion struggled, his tiny body trembling with raw energy. Nash's mind raced. He couldn't win in a straight fight, not like this, but there was one thing he could do. His fingers found the old data terminal beside him, the last working console in the room. It was a risky move, a desperate one, but he didn't have a choice. Nash hit the manual override immediately. The entire station shuddered, the containment doors began sealing shut, alarms blaring in warning. The station had self-construct failsafes built to ensure nothing got out if the experiments went wrong. Nash had just triggered them. The leader stiffened. You idiot, he hissed, you'll die here too. Nash pushed himself up, pain shooting through his ribs, and glared at him. If it means keeping him out of your hands, he grinned, bloody and defiant. Worth it. The leader cursed, his grip on Orion tightening, but the little tiger wasn't done fighting. A surge of energy crackled through the room, the air thickening with power. Orion's fur stood on end, his body glowing brighter than ever before, and then he unleashed it. A pulse of raw, uncontrolled energy exploded outward, shaking the entire lab. The leader screamed as his suit fried instantly, his grip breaking as he was thrown backward. Orion dropped to the ground, landed on all fours, and ran straight to Nash. Nash caught him, barely able to stand, his heart hammering. The station was collapsing around them, they had seconds left. With one final burst of strength, Nash grabbed Orion and sprinted for the docking bay. The Celestial Nomad's ramp was already lowering, the autopilot had responded to the emergency distress. They leapt inside just as the doors sealed shut, and as Nash punched the launch thrusters, the station behind them exploded, vanishing into the void in a final burst of white-hot light and silence, just the deep, steady breath of space around them. Nash leaned back in his seat, chest heaving, his mind spinning. Orion curled up beside him, his fur still faintly glowing, his eyes locked onto Nash. Not a pet, not an experiment, something more, Nash exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Well, kid, he muttered, glancing at him, guess you're stuck with me now. Orion wagged his tail and, for the first time, he purred.